The animal in this story weighs less than 30 pounds. It has no teeth, no claws, no venom, and it has never killed anything larger than a fish in its entire life. It hit her exactly once, and then it stopped, immediately, because it had accomplished what it set out to accomplish. And it turned around and went back to its nest and paid no further attention to her at all. The injury it gave her was a fractured forearm. That is a 6-week injury. That is an injury people drive themselves to the emergency room with, holding the wrist against the chest, mildly annoyed. It is not a fatal wound, and there is no version of the world in which it is a fatal wound. She nearly died in 4 feet of water, 20 feet from a paved path, in a public park, in the middle of the morning, with other people standing around. This is not a story about a dangerous animal. It is a story about the mistake almost every single person makes when they assess risk in the outdoors, which is that they look at the animal and never once look at the ground. Welcome to Sunk Cost. The names in this story are invented, but the danger is entirely real, drawn from the way nesting waterfowl actually injure people every spring, and from the reason those injuries occasionally turn into something far worse than a broken bone. Her name was Marisa Deneuve, 31, and she was, of everyone in this story, the person who loved those birds the most. That is not a flourish. It is the mechanism. She had been photographing at that lake for 6 years. She had a feeder at home. She could identify every species that came through in migration, and she knew, individually, the swan pair that nested in the reeds at the north end, because she had been photographing them since before they paired up. She had hundreds of images of them. She had watched them for 6 autumns and 6 winters and most of 6 summers. And in all of that time, they had been exactly what everyone believes swans are. Enormous, elegant, faintly imperious, and entirely uninterested in hurting anybody. They swam toward people. They took bread from children. They would come within a few feet of her tripod and ignore her completely. Her model of that bird was detailed, accurate, and built from a great deal of real observation. It was also built almost entirely between June and February. To understand what happened at that lake, you have to understand 3 things, and only the first one is about birds. A mute swan is a big animal. A large male can weigh close to 30 pounds and carry a wingspan approaching 8 feet. And inside the leading edge of the wing, there is a bony structure at the carpal joint, a hard knob of bone at the bend of the wing. When a swan strikes with a wing, it is not slapping you with feathers. It is swinging a heavy, fast, rigid lever with a bony point at the end of it, driven by the muscles of an animal that flies. Wildlife rehabilitators and park staff who handle them will tell you the same thing without any drama. A swan wing can break a human forearm, and does most years, somewhere. And here is the part that people who love these birds get wrong, and it is the specific thing that got Marisa Deneuve. During nesting season, a swan or a goose is functionally a different animal. Outside the nesting period, they are tolerant, food-motivated, and happy to share space with people. From the moment there is a nest with eggs in it, the defended radius expands enormously, and the tolerance drops to nothing, and they will move on an intruder without the long, escalating warning sequence people expect from wildlife. They do give signals. They are just terrible signals for a human being to receive, because every single one of them reads as something else. The bird arches its neck back into a curve and lifts its wings up over its back into a raised arch. This is called busking, and it is a threat display, and to any person holding a camera, it looks like the single most beautiful pose that animal is capable of. It looks like the photograph you came for. People do not back away from busking. They lean in and take the shot. It hisses. A swan's hiss is a low, flat, sustained sound, and to somebody standing in a park, it registers as a funny noise a bird made, not as a warning. And it swims directly toward you, closing the distance in a straight line. which is exactly what these same birds do in July when they think you have bread. Every warning it gives is a warning that has been rendered meaningless by the rest of the year. The second thing is what a broken arm does to a person standing in water. And this is the part of the video that matters most, because it applies to 100 situations that have nothing to do with birds. A fractured forearm removes roughly half of a person's ability to do anything in water. You cannot swim on one arm with any efficiency. You cannot push yourself up off a bottom with an arm that will not bear weight. You cannot grab something and pull. And you cannot do any of it because attempting to use that arm produces pain severe enough to stop the attempt cold. Now add the water itself. In spring, a lake is far colder than the air above it because water warms weeks behind the season. A person going into that water in May is going into cold water shock, an involuntary gasp, then rapid, uncontrolled breathing that cannot be slowed by wanting to. That reflex is survivable when your face is above the surface, and disastrous when it is not. Add the bottom. Lake margins in reed beds are soft silt, not sand. There's nothing to push against. A foot pressed down sinks, and the leverage disappears. And the stems of aquatic plants wrap around ankles. Add clothing and shoes, which hold water and pull. And then understand the fact that undoes everything people assume. You do not need deep water to drown. You need to be unable to get your face above the surface. A person can drown in water that is chest deep, standing on the bottom, if a broken arm and cold shock and silt and panic have combined to prevent them from standing up. Depth is not the variable. The ability to rise is the variable. The third thing is the one this whole channel keeps circling, and this story states it more clearly than any other we have covered. You cannot assess the danger of an animal by assessing the animal. You have to assess the pairing of the injury and the ground. Take that exact swan strike, that one blow, and place it in 3 different locations. On the grass of a park lawn, it is a fracture, an ambulance ride, a cast, an annoying summer. On the wet rocks at a lake edge, it is a fracture, plus a fall onto stone. And now you are talking about a head injury. Standing thigh-deep in cold, silty water, it is a fracture that takes away the one thing you need in order to stand up in water that is already trying to take your breath. Same bird, same strike. 3 completely different stories. And the variable that decides which story you get is not the animal at all. It is what is underneath you and behind you when it happens. This is why people are killed by animals that are not dangerous, not because the animal was secretly lethal, because the person evaluated the animal, decided it was survivable, and never once evaluated the place they were standing when they decided it. The person who tried to tell her was a volunteer named Anna Brill, 62, who monitored the nesting sites at that lake every spring for the Parks Department, counting eggs and marking off the reed beds with little signs that almost nobody reads. She caught Marissa at the edge of the water, and she said the 2 things she says every May. She said that the pair had a nest in the reeds with eggs in it, and that a swan in April and May is not the swan people know from the rest of the year, and that they will come at you without much warning, and a wing strike breaks bones. And then she said the part that Marissa did not really hear because it was not about birds and did not sound like it belonged in the conversation. She said, "Do not go into the water for a picture. If something happens on the bank, you fall on the grass. If something happens out there, there is nowhere to fall except in." Marissa Deneuve was warm and polite and slightly amused, and she said the sentence that this whole video exists to take apart. She said, "I've been photographing these swans for 6 years. They know me. They come right up to me." Every word of that is true, and none of it applies. The first problem is a kind of blindness that almost nobody recognizes in themselves. When we build a mental model of an animal, we build it out of the times we have seen it, and we do not tag those observations with a season. Marissa's model of that swan was assembled overwhelmingly in summer, autumn, and winter, because that is when she visited most. She was not being careless with the evidence. She simply had no reason to suspect that the same animal ran a completely different behavioral program for 8 weeks a year. We all understand that a place is different in winter. Almost nobody applies the same reasoning to the creatures in it. The second problem is the deeper one, and it is worth naming clearly because it drives an enormous share of outdoor injuries. When people assess risk, they focus on the hazardous object and stop there. Is this animal dangerous? Is this rock loose? Is this branch strong? The question they do not ask is the scene question. If this goes wrong right now, where does my body end up? Marissa performed a reasonable evaluation of a swan and concluded, accurately, that swans do not kill people. She never performed any evaluation of the water. And the point of no return in this story is not the moment she approached the nest. It was earlier and smaller than that. And it was the step off the bank. From the instant she was standing in the water instead of on the grass, the worst realistic outcome of the morning had changed categories. From a fracture to a drowning. And nothing that happened afterward could change it back. There was another photographer at the lake that morning, a man named Ellis Tam, 44, and he wanted the same picture she wanted. He set up on the paved path with a long telephoto lens, and he stayed there. And his reason was that he had good shoes on and did not want to walk into a muddy lake edge in them. That is the entire deliberation he conducted. He has never claimed otherwise. Marissa went in, and the water rewarded her, the way these situations always do at the start. Ankle deep, and nothing happened. The birds did not react at all. She took several frames, and the light was beautiful, and everything about the situation confirmed that she had been right, and the volunteer had been fussing. Knee-deep, and the male turned toward her and arched his neck back and lifted his wings into that enormous white arch, and she got the best photograph she had taken in 2 years. It is genuinely a spectacular image. It is also, in the language of the animal making it, a final notice. Then he hissed, and she smiled, because it is a slightly ridiculous sound. She took 2 more steps toward the reeds, and now she was thigh-deep on soft silt with her boots sinking, and the male came at her across the water, fast. She did what every human being does. She threw up an arm to protect her face. The strike caught the forearm, and everyone within 50 yards heard it. And then the swan stopped. That is the part people find hardest to picture. It did not press an attack. It did not stand over her. It did not come again. It had removed a threat from the vicinity of its nest, which was the entire objective, and it turned and swam back toward the reeds. And from that second onward, this story has no antagonist in it at all. What it had instead was a woman with a broken arm, thigh-deep on soft silt, in 50-degree water, off balance and going backward. She went down and under, and the cold hit her breathing, and she came up gasping in the way people do in cold water, and she tried to get her feet under her, and she could not. The arm would not take weight. The other hand went into silt and found nothing solid. Her boots were full and heavy, and one of them was held by plant stems. Every attempt to rise cost her air and got her nothing. And she was in water that was, at that spot, roughly chest deep on a standing adult. And here is the part that people on the bank could not read, and it is the single most useful thing in this video. Drowning does not look like drowning. There is no thrashing, no waving, no shouting for help. The body's instinctive drowning response is silent and almost motionless. The mouth is at the waterline, and the person is spending everything they have on breathing, so they cannot call out. And the arms are pressed down on the water surface, trying to lever the head up, so they cannot wave. From a distance, A drowning person looks like a person standing in water, upright, quiet, facing the shore, not doing very much. It looks calm. It looks like nothing is wrong. There were 4 people within sight of her. 2 of them looked directly at her and saw a woman standing in the lake. Ellis Tam was the one who understood. And he understood it because he was watching through a 400mm lens and had been photographing her by accident. And in a viewfinder, he could see that her chin was at the water and had been for too long. He did the right thing twice. He shouted, which brought 2 more people running, and he did not go in. That is not cowardice, and it needs to be said plainly, because it is the correct answer and it looks like the wrong one. A rescuer wading into cold water onto soft silt to reach a person who is beyond helping themselves is how 1 casualty becomes 2. And it is one of the most reliable patterns in drowning statistics. The instruction that lifeguards repeat is 4 words long. Throw, don't go. Reach with something. Throw something that floats. Use a branch or a pole or a jacket. Get a line to them. Entering the water is the last option for the people who have training and equipment, and it is not the first thing an ordinary person should do. They got a long branch to her within about 90 seconds. She had been face down for some part of that. Marisa Deneuve did not die at that lake. She was pulled out unconscious and not breathing, and a woman on the path started rescue breathing and CPR, and she was resuscitated by paramedics and taken to a hospital. She was without oxygen long enough to cause damage that did not fully resolve. She has what is described in the notes as a hypoxic brain injury. Her short-term memory is unreliable. Her processing is slower. She gets exhausted by ordinary conversation, and she has not worked since. Her arm healed completely in 6 weeks, exactly as a broken forearm does. The bird's injury was cured before she came home from the hospital. The last picture on her camera is the swan, wings raised in that enormous white arch, neck curved back, taken about 4 seconds before the strike. It is the best photograph she ever took of that pair. Everyone who looks at it says the same thing, which is that it is beautiful. And Anna Brill says the same thing every time she is shown it, which is that it is a photograph of a warning. There is nothing rare about the shape of this. Nesting waterfowl injure people every spring across North America and Europe, and the great majority of those injuries are bruises and fractures and nothing more. The ones that become serious are almost always the ones that happen in the water, or on the wet rocks and steep banks beside it, where a non-fatal injury is instantly converted by the environment into something else. The bird is never the reason. The bird is the trigger. The place is the reason. And that is the transferable part of this, the part worth keeping if you keep nothing else. When you are deciding whether to get closer to anything in the outdoors, the question is not whether the thing can kill you. Most things cannot. The question is what happens to your body in the 2 seconds after something goes wrong. If the answer is you fall over on grass, your worst case is embarrassment. If the answer is you fall into cold water, or off a wet rock, or down a slope, then a harmless animal and a minor injury have all the leverage they need. The short version? Nesting season changes familiar birds into defensive ones, roughly spring into early summer. Raised wings and an arched neck and a hiss are threats, not poses. Stay on solid ground when you photograph anything near water, because the injury is not the danger, the falling is. Drowning is silent and looks like standing. And if someone is in trouble in the water, throw or reach, do not go. Ellis Tam has been clear that he is not the hero of this. He did not know a single fact about swans or nesting seasons, and he was not exercising judgment when he stayed on the path. He had nice shoes and did not want lake mud on them. And that is the whole difference between him and the woman 20 feet away, who knew more about those birds than anyone else at that lake. Anna Brill still walks that shoreline every spring. She still puts out the little signs almost nobody reads, and she has changed what she says to photographers because she found that talking about the birds does not work on people who love the birds. Now she talks about the ground. When they ask her whether swans are really dangerous, she tells them it is the wrong question. And then she gives them the answer she has been giving for years. A swan on the grass gives you a cast, she says. The same swan, when you are standing knee-deep in cold water, gives you something else entirely. The animal never changed. The ground did.